Welcome to my second video in how to manage scoliosis with exercise. In this video I'm going to take you through how to look at your X-rays and how to read your X-ray reports so that you can be as specific as you can with exercises to manage your curves. Because if you're not specific with the exercises, you can actually make a big mistake and you can actually make your curve worse by bending it the wrong way. And you'll be surprised how many people look at their X-rays the wrong way around, and I'm going to tell you exactly how not to make that mistake. But on the flip side, I've also had people who have looked at their curves, worked out exactly the exercise they need to be doing with my help, and had the most remarkable results. Some people have told me that their headaches have disappeared, their TMJ pain has disappeared, their bowel movements have got better. And these were unexpected side effects of doing specific scoliosis exercises that had benefited them in ways that they couldn't have anticipated. Like if you want to manage your scoliosis using exercise, this is a very important video for you to watch to make sure that you get everything to be as precise as possible for when you do the exercises. The last thing you want to be doing is the wrong exercises and ultimately, either make it worse or not make any changes at all. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to go through exactly how I look at an X-rays, how to read the reports of an X-ray, but also I'm going to show you how to do a simple home test which can help diagnose 4 of the main curves of scoliosis, and you don't need to expose yourself to any excess radiation or X-rays. Well, lastly, some of you watched the last video, part 1, and you've sent me in your X-rays and your X-ray reports. So at the end of this video, I'm actually going to go through those and you'll see how I examined your X-rays, and I'll use your first name only, and I'm going to blank out anything that gives your surname or your address or anything like that. So I'm going to keep it confidentiality. But you're going to see your own X-rays as I go through them on this video. So enough of me talking. We're going to go over to my computer now, just down here, and I'm going to get into your X-rays. Now I'm going to be discussing the 4 main types of curves, which are the 2 types of C curve and the 2 types of S curve. Now these types of scoliosis don't have any known cause, which is why they're referred to as idiopathic, which is just a fancy way of saying no known cause. They commonly occur during adolescence, or in the case of a C-shaped curve in the lower back, that can come in later life. All right, so we have a left C curve. We have a right C curve, essentially the same curve, just going from different directions. We have an S-shaped curve, and you can see why it's called an S-shaped curve simply from its shape. And then a reverse S curve. Now the most common one is the last one, a reverse S-shaped curve. And this is what people would refer to as an adolescent idiopathic scoliosis. And it most commonly occurs in adolescents or teenagers. And so they would have been investigated, but again, there's no known cause. And these curves account for 80% of the scoliosis curves out there. I'm also going to show you how to test your curves from home in case you don't have an X-ray, but we'll do that later. All right, if in doubt, you have to ask for an X-ray because an X-ray is the gold standard. Now, for example, some people might look like they have an idiopathic scoliosis, but really it is caused by something, and that's congenital. It means that they were born with it. For example, here we can see that there is a hemivertebra, which means half a vertebra, or some of the vertebrae are stuck together. Now on an X-ray, that can look like this. But your X-ray report will tell you whether or not you have a hemivertebra or a failure of segmentation. What type of X-ray should you ask for? A standing X-ray from the front and the back and the side is the best one to ask for, because this lets us know whether your hips are in line or one hip is higher than the other. Now we also like to have X-rays with no brace. The X-ray should include both hips, whole pelvis if possible, the whole spine definitely, and if possible, the lower half of the skull and shoulder girdle. Now when should you take an X-ray? Well, if the child, assuming your child has an scoliosis, is still growing and their degrees are more than 30, they should be taken 4 times a year. Now, if the curve is less than 30 degrees and has not progressed, then the X-rays can be taken just once a year. And the reason for that is that during the growth spurt of children, the curve can increase rapidly. Now, for adults who stop growing, they can have an X-ray just once every 4 years, unless some sort of rapid change is suspected. All right, let's get to the curves and see what we can find here. So this is a single curve. We call it a thoracic dextro-scoliosis, dextro meaning right. And the curve is referred to by the side of the convexity, or the long side or the apex. They're all the same thing. So when we look at a spine like this, we can divide it into two areas. There's the thoracic, and then there's the lumbar. And so the red line here is the thoracic, and the green line is the lumbar. The thoracic consists of 12 bones, or vertebrae, and the lumbar consists of the bottom 5. As this curve is in the thoracic vertebra, we can call this a thoracic C-shaped curve. Or to be more accurate, when we look at it from behind, we can call it a thoracic reverse C-shaped curve. Now you can see there's just one major curve here. We can also call that the primary curve. There is a corrective curve below it, here. But that one is secondary to the primary, and we're not going to refer to it here. Now, some X-rays are taken from the front. Now watch out for this because it can be confusing. Learn how to flip the X-ray. Now usually somewhere on the X-ray there'll be a little L or for left or a little R for right. This can help orientate you. So you can see here I've underlined the R with that red on the left-hand side. Now if there is no indication of which side is which, you can look at the heart, because the heart should always be on the left if you are looking at someone from behind. So you can see here I flipped that X-ray, circled the heart, and you can see the R is underlined. And after the R it says PA, which stands for posterior to anterior. So this is taken from someone looking at them from behind, which is the same way I like to look at X-rays when I'm looking at someone standing in front of me and I compare their X-ray to their spine. Okay, so let's look at a different type of curve. This curve is called a thoracolumbar Levo-scoliosis, or as I like to call it, a left C-shaped curve when viewed from behind. Now you can see that the curve starts at the top of the lumbar vertebrae, where the green line is, and then it extends up into the thoracic vertebrae, where the red line is. So that's why it's called a thoracolumbar Levo-scoliosis, because the curve is in two different areas of the spine. Well, let's talk about double curves. Now we can call these ones a dextrothoracic, meaning right thorax, and levolumbar, meaning left lumbar. But most commonly, this type of curve is called a reverse S-shaped curve. So when you look at someone from behind, this is the shape they will have. They will have a slight rib hump on their upper right back and a slight thickening on their lower left back. And you may even see the spine in this reverse S shape. Now these curves are actually quite balanced, meaning the top and the bottom curves are nearly equal. But it isn't always like this though. Sometimes one curve can be almost double the other curve. And whichever is biggest is referred to as the primary curve, which I mentioned before. And it's often best to start by treating the primary curve with exercises, as the secondary curve, the smaller one, will usually decrease if the one that's bigger than it is dealt with. Okay, so now you've seen an S-shaped curve, you've seen a C-shaped curve in both ways. And so what we're going to have a look at now is how you can actually find these things out from home without an X-ray. So some people don't actually want X-rays or repeated X-rays. And an X-ray doesn't actually take into account something called rotation. And that is where the spine will bend at this, rotate or bend at the same time it bends to the left or right. So in a thoracic curve with the curve apex on the right hand side, it will always be accompanied by right rotation. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. But first I want to show you the Adams test. So the actual mechanics of the Adams test are quite straightforward. You simply ask a person to stand in front of you and you make sure their legs are straight, there's no knee bend. And you ask them to slowly bend forward, vertebrae by vertebrae. And as they bend forward, the flexion, that's the movement of the spine that happens, will increase the rotation, and you will start to see a rib hump or a thickening in certain areas of their back. The reason this happens is that the flexion of the spine increases rotation. Rotation of the spine is increased by side bending. So where a person has a side bending or that curve in their spine will also rotate. So let's have a look at what the Adams test could look like. So imagine you're seated or crouched behind someone. You may see something like this. Now my focus here is on the upper right back where you can see the rib hump. A rib hump like this on the right will indicate that the rotation of the ribs is to the right. This is because the ribs are attached to the vertebrae. Now, as they are rotated to the right, you will also know with some degree of certainty that the upper spine here has a thoracic dextro-scoliosis, or a curve with the apex on the right, or as I call it, a right C-curve. So this is how the spine would look if someone was bending forward in front of you and had a rib hump on the right hand side. So let's have a look how that looks for something slightly different. So reverse S-shaped scoliosis. Here you will see a hump on the upper right back, but also a thickening on the lower left back. And this is the most common type of scoliosis, and this is the most common type of, most common presentation you would see. When this person is standing up, you may notice that their right shoulder blade sticks out a little bit more than their left shoulder blade. Let's have a look at a C-shaped scoliosis here. So the apex will be on the left-hand side, which also means the rib hump will be on the left-hand side. So looking at a C-shaped curve, you'll have a rib hump on the left. Now for a regular S-shaped curve, this is less common. And when we actually see this in children or teens, it's often a sign of something else going on. So this could be some sort of cerebral palsy or paralysis or some sort of muscular abnormality. So Duchenne's muscular dystrophy or some other syndrome like Marfan's or neurofibromatosis. So it's worth checking if you have this pattern of scoliosis, if there's anything else going on. Now, don't freak out. It doesn't always mean that, but it's just less common. So what would we see here? We would see that rib hump on the upper left, and we'd also see a thickening on the lower right in the lumbars. Now, how can we measure this from home? There's a device that's very cheap and can be bought online, and it measures the rotation of the curve, or you can use this to measure the rotation of a curve of a family member. And it's called a scoliometer. These can be a useful tool to track changes in curve rotation without multiple X-rays. A lot of my older clients don't like having multiple X-rays, and they're more focused on the aesthetics of their spine. So this is a great tool to notice any changes in the rotation. You can even use your smartphone with these as well. What you do here is you simply find the most rotated part of the curve. Then you place the scoliometer on it just like in this picture. And it will give you the angle of rotation. Now, as you use exercises to manage your curve, you can then track changes over time. The key here is to make sure you're in exactly the same position every time. I like to have people measure a mark on their shins where they are able to put their hands every time. Maybe that's 6 inches or 15 centimeters on the floor. Also, it can be helpful to actually count the vertebrae either from your pelvis up or from your neck down to make sure you get the same one every time. However you do it, make sure it's repeatable. Okay, so there you have it. You now know how to look at your X-ray or X-ray report to find out exactly what type of curve you have so that you can be more specific with the exercises that you're going to do. Now, if you don't have an X-ray or X-ray report, you know how to assess your spine with the Adams test and monitor it with a scoliometer. Now, in the scoliosis correction protocol, my upcoming course that comes out on October 9th, I actually go through many different ways to manage the spine using exercise. One of the first things I look for, though, is how to make a weak spine stronger and how to make a stiff spine more mobile. Because once you've got mobility and strength, then you can start to change those curves to correct them. But it's not only about correcting a curve or slowing down the progression of a curve, it's about adding endurance to a tired spine, adding endurance to a fatigued spine. So I show people how to add endurance as well. Now, if you're interested in joining me on the Scoliosis Correction Protocol course that starts very soon, I want you to click the link underneath this video, just in the caption down there, and put your name down on the early bird list. The reason I have an early bird list is that sometimes it sells out because I only open up the course 2 to 3 times a year. And what I try and do is reward people who've given interest prior to the actual launch date. So the launch is on the 9th. It's open to the general public, but if you're on the early bird list, I actually let you sign up a day early. So I let you sign up on the Sunday. And that means you will have like the early bird access and almost guarantee your registration. So make sure you put your name on the list if you want to be part of this course. Also, look out for my next video that comes out on Friday. On Friday, I will be sharing with you one exercise that I think is commonly missed by almost everybody who helps people using exercise for scoliosis. And I'll tell you what it is. Basically, I'm going to show you a simple way to test the muscles around your hips to see if one of those muscles is too tight, the one that connects the thigh bone, the femur, across the pelvis into the lumbar spine. If that muscle is too tight, you can actually pull that lumbar spine off axis, and you can try and move the spine as much as you want, but it won't change until you relax the hip. So we're going to start the foundation, we're going to start the hips, and I'm going to show you how to change the length of that muscle in order to give your lumbar spine the best environment it can be in to recover fully. So I'll see you in the next video, and hopefully I'll see you in the course as well.